comics?
Because they have no
School is in session at the Umbrella Academy at the Mike and Joe, Boneless Comics podcast after show.
That's right, everybody. Welcome to the after show.
Welcome. Come on in. Take a seat. Are you doing the show?
I don't know. Are
Think
we
again?
supposed to do that every time, or is that some audio effect you're supposed to do? I don't know. We
I
can
don't
do
know.
it without the audio effect.
It can be a thing. Sure,
But-
why not? It's our thing now.
As long as I don't do it at a specific resonance and pull the moon into the earth, it'll be okay.
No, we need to avoid that because I don't want to have to use my telekinesis powers to blow up the moon.
That's
'Cause we need
right.
the moon. But what I want to know is it the chunk of the moon that has CHA written on it, or was it
Oh
a
my God.
unwritten place?
That's a deep cut comic book reference.
Give me an H.
Anybody that's watched The Tick,
No, give me an A.
you will know what he's talking about. If not, then look up CHA on
Where's the rest of my A?
trying.
It'll be
Yeah.
a fun YouTube hole to fall down for sure. But
We get to have our own, where we talk about weird things that doesn't have any it has backstory. You just don't know what it is, and
right.
we have
We just
become the
make
comic.
references out of context. I think people won't have any idea. So I want to talk about Gerard Way a little bit because I've read part of his Doom Patrol run, and for me, that experience was much worse than reading this was, as far
Really?
as not knowing what the heck was going on. And so I don't.
What year was that run?
That was I don't know, 2016, 2017,
So
somewhere in
more
there.
recent.
Yeah, it's much more recent. And I don't know if it's just my unfamiliarity with the Doom Patrol characters, but it very much felt like I wasn't able to follow the story and there were just random things happening and it was just kind of strange for the sake of being strange.
Sounds
And-
familiar.
There are writers out there that do that. Grant Morrison is the top example in comics of he's an idea man. So he throws out crazy ideas and then runs with them. And that's very much how he writes. I think he's a better writer than Gerard Way, though. So I think he's able to implement that a little bit better. I'm not the biggest fan of Grant Morrison, but there are characters that he's created that I actually really, really love, like Damian Wayne, for instance, or DC's version of the Frankenstein monster are both characters that I really love. So I don't think that the writing of Morrison is completely without merit, but there is a lot of that similar tone of strangeness just coming in and you're like, what's going on? And so Gerard Way actually writes in the foreword about meeting Grant Morrison and how they exchanged ideas and they have kind of similar sensibilities towards writing. So that makes a lot of sense to me because they're very similar tonally. Just the Doom Patrol thing was just not for me. I just couldn't get into it. I think I read 2 issues and I was like, this is cool. It's a DC team that I haven't read about. I want to check it out, kind of get into it. But after 2 issues, I was like, I really have no idea what's going on. And I don't think I'm going to. So when I was buying it on issue by issue basis, I was like, I can't really justify the cost when I don't really understand the story. So
Yeah.
I don't know. That said, the Netflix show fills in a lot of these story gaps that you're wondering about. So I think we had kind of discussed before, but I think your experience with that is probably going to be a lot better because they do get much deeper into the character backstories. One major difference is they do drop the conductor character out completely.
Oh,
And they have a guy that basically wants to get violin lessons from Vanya, and he's sort of dating her, and then you find out that he's discovered the professor's notes and he's been keeping them in his apartment and studying them, and he actually hates the Umbrella Academy because of something, I can't remember what, but he starts pushing her further and further to use her powers more and more and more. And then finally, she discovers she's the most powerful of them all. And in the Netflix show, it's more like when she uses the powers, they almost take possession of her. So she doesn't have control over herself. And so it's not as malicious when she has her turn. So that's kind of an interesting change that they make. Also, they drop any hint of there being like a romantic subplot between Diego and Vanya, which that's something they only hinted at in the comic. There's none of that in the Netflix show. However, they really play up the fact that like Luther and Allison are attracted to each other, which is kind of weird because
like
they were
the Flash and
yeah.
well, Barry specifically and Iris on the CW.
Yeah. So I mean, it's one of those things where like you watch it and you're like, okay, well, they're not really brother and sister. So it's not technically weird, but
they grew up
at
in the same
time, it's
household,
kind of
with
weird.
the same parent. Like it's
Yeah.
you're not like actually related, but you kind of grew up like you were.
Yeah. So it's weird. I'm not sure how I feel about that whole thing, but they sort of play that up like they're never actually together, but they definitely, you know, they have like looks at each other and stuff, and he's like, well, I'm a monster now, nobody would want to be with me, and you know, that kind of thing, because he has the body of a monkey.
That's that's one thing about this comic I will say, is that it wasn't dramatic, and so like I kind of wonder, you know, being a Netflix show, if they have to play up the drama aspect, and so you kind of lose some of the quirkiness, because now we're talking about drama and we have to deal with these relationships, and we have, you know, those kinds of things. Like obviously, you know, character relationships are important, but I'm talking about the like dramatized for TV version.
It's not. So you definitely have the same sense of anything can happen at any time. They bring in some characters that are from the second trade in the first season, Hazel and Cha-Cha, who are hitmen for the temp agency. And they tell you right up front that number 5 used to be an assassin for the temporal agency, and they get them involved in shenanigans. So that's a whole subplot that's running throughout the show. Okay. And you see him do a lot of insane action stuff in a 10-year-old body while talking like a 65-year-old. I think that's like part of the most fun of the show, is like that actor that plays number 5 is like so good. Like his expressions in the comic book, like the actor does those sort of like his eyes are half open and he's just rolling his eyes at everybody around him. And he looks like he's 10, but he's an old man. And he just does not care. And he's so over, like, I'm not going to coddle everybody's emotions. Like, we just need to go save the world and figure out who we need to shoot to stop this. And that, you know, that's kind of his deal. So he's very snarky. He's very sarcastic. He's very like hard to get along with, but, you know, which is another reason why like he reappears and everybody's just like, oh, it's you, you know, they're kind of like he had an attitude problem before, you know? So
that's funny. That kind of sounds like, well, two different things. So there was a TV series called Travelers back in like 2016, I think. And so there was, it wasn't a child. This was more of a teenager, but it was where they're sending people's consciousness from the future back in time, and they inhabit the bodies of people who were about to die, so that way they're not actually killing anybody, blah blah blah. But basically there's this old guy, like, you know, 50 60 plus, who goes into, his consciousness is in the body of this like teenager, you know, almost 18. And so now you've got both this character who's really interesting, but you also have the actor who sells it really well, because he's all like calm, cool, and collected, and things happen, and he just, you know, he moves a little bit slower, but then he's able to run, and he's like, oh yeah, I can push this body, that's fun. And it's just it's funny to see them play, you know, a character like that,
right?
And, you know, especially with a child actor. And I don't know, like, if we're gonna get into having more of that, because, you know, we've seen that with movies like Harry Potter and Stranger Things, where we have these child actors who do a really good job of conveying these more mature, adults.
Complex emotions that they're able to communicate as child actors. I think Stranger Things is probably like the top example. Like basically everyone on that show is great. I don't
Yeah.
know if that comes down to just they have really good direction or what, but yeah.
Well, the child actor or actress, I should say, who plays Leia on the Obi-Wan Disney Plus series that just concluded, she just is, I don't know if she's like 8 or something. She's like super young, but she talks like an adult. Like I almost wonder if Disney
Wow.
has figured out how to put like older people's consciousness into children, because I'm just watching her and I'm like, I don't believe that this child is doing this acting. Like she's like, she rattles off these lines and they sound convincing, and she's
Wow.
like bossing people around. And it's cool because it follows the spirit of the character Leia
Sure.
from Star Wars, and she's very independent and headstrong. And but to see her as a child doing this at a young age,
Never made one decision for yourself in your entire life, and you never will.
where did they find this kid from? Like this amazing acting. Like I could never even get close to acting like that in anything. Like how did they do that? So I guess it's like a similar thing with the Netflix Umbrella Academy.
Right. Well, I mean, yeah, the performances are one of the things that make it really enjoyable, honestly.
Version of myself that exists across every possible instance of time.
That makes no sense.
Well, what if you were smarter?
Because the actors and actresses really inhabit these characters well. So, and it feels
That's
like they
good.
know them really well and that they're really well cast. Like the guy that plays Diego, it's funny because he's really abrasive in the comic book, but he comes across as like the recklessness is more played up in the show, and he is a little bit abrasive, but it's more like he's just dumb.
You killed one of ours, Olga. Now we're coming after you. You will be dead by nightfall.
Hey, it's Urga for Urga, idiots. Swedish for an eye for an eye. Means the Swedes killed Elliot.
Wrong number. Have a lovely day. We would have gotten there eventually. Yeah.
Like he wants to be cool and be a vigilante and be a superhero, and he's really into that whole like lifestyle and everything. And everybody else is like, you need to take this more seriously. Like we could die. And he like for instance, there's a part in this is a bit of a spoiler, but there's a part in the second season where they accidentally time travel back to the Kennedy assassination, and he's like, I'm going to prevent the Kennedy assassination from happening. That's why I'm here, is to save the president. And they're like, you idiot, you're going to destroy the entire timeline. Like you can't just go and decide that the president's not going to get assassinated. And he's like, no, that's what I'm going to do. And so they
Doesn't
I
he
mean,
mention that in the story? The Kennedy assassination?
They bring up the Kennedy assassination, which again is foreshadowing for, later in the comic books, but it's a story point that they have to get into later. But it's just funny because they all have their own perspectives, and Diego is just kind of like naive, and he's like, yeah, I want to do what's right all the time and be the superhero and be the good guy and all this stuff. But the world that he exists in is not really black and white, so he can't really do that. And so a lot of the other people have to kind of keep like pulling him back to reality. And he makes a lot of messes for them to get out of too. So number 5, he's probably the best actor on the show. Although the guy that plays Klaus is really good too. He's interesting because they only allude to this in the comic book, but he takes like pills and all this stuff to basically suppress his abilities because he sees dead people all the time. Like all the time. So his power is actually terrifying. So he wants to like push that down as much as he can. Because I guess, I don't know if they ever showed this in the comic, but on the show, they're like, oh, the professor would lock me in a closet as a child and like make me talk to the dead people for like an entire night or something to develop my power and see, what it could do and stuff like that. So it's more of like a character moment for him when he uses them at the climax in the show, because he's been sort of like afraid to use his powers for the whole season. And then he gets to the point where it's like, you're the only one that can save us. Like you've got to do something to stop the moon from hitting the earth, basically. So that's, yeah. they definitely like flesh him out a lot more, and it actually makes sense that he would not be super comfortable with that ability. But the other thing that they add in, which I think is genius, that they should have done in the comic book, is Ben, the member that was dead. He's there next to Klaus, like talking to him all the time. Like he's right next to the Umbrella Academy team the entire time.
Hey, Ben! Jesus Christ, will you please? Just look, I'm going through a lot right now.
You're always going through a lot.
Ben,
And so he's actually a character on the show, even though he's dead.
But he's able to communicate through.
Yeah, he's able to communicate with Klaus as like a ghost. So yeah, he's always there, and he's almost like Klaus's conscience, where he's like, "You're not gonna drag us over here, are you?" And but he like hangs out with him because he's the only person he can talk to, really, because he doesn't have a body. So
Yeah.
so yeah, it's I don't know. They feel more three-dimensional in the show for sure. So yeah, it is one of those things where I rated it a little higher than you, and I think it's just because I like the concept a lot, and I know that the potential is there because I've seen it realized in a more like professional way, I guess.
So is number 2, that's Diego, right?
Yeah.
So isn't he the one that's like Agent 00.02?
Yeah.
And he looks like this like Spec Ops pirate guy with the skull on his chest.
So he
And
does
he's
have
the Kraken.
Yeah,
as well.
he does have a vigilante outfit in the show, but it's not nearly as ridiculous as that.
That's probably a good thing.
So the Umbrella Academy outfits that they have as kids, they do show that in the show. However, they're like superhero outfits as adults. They don't ever do that. They just wear like street clothes, basically.
That's
They
so
also
fun.
don't use their code names really ever. I mean, there's a couple times, like I think somebody calls Allison the Rumor at one point, and they call Luther Space Boy, but they usually use just the number or their actual name. So it's funny because I was going into this story and like I know them more with their actual first names than I do like their numbers or their their superhero identities. So that was a disconnect for me where I had to remember like, okay, who's the Kraken? Like that's weird. I don't remember any of them having water powers. And then I'm like, oh, it's Diego because he has the knives. And they basically got rid of the underwater thing, and they're like, he just throws knives. Like that's he's basically Bullseye on the show.
His name
So.
seemed to be the one that kind of fit the least, like the Rumor, the Seance, Space Boy. Well, number 5 being the boy doesn't really do anything for you, but I assume nobody can really describe his powers. So
not really. He also teleports a lot in the show, like a lot. Like he'll be fighting and he'll teleport behind somebody and punch them, and then teleport in front of them and punch them, and it's so he kind of like rifts around a whole bunch.
How'd you do that? Don't really have time to explain.
And they didn't really show that in this story, so I don't know if the comic book version of him can actually teleport or if he can only time travel or what it is. Because again, the comic book just doesn't.
Yeah,
they don't.
It doesn't
flesh
give that
out.
to you.
Yeah. So.
So here's a deep cut for you. When you're talking about him teleporting behind somebody and punching them, that's something that I've always wanted to do. And the reason is because when I was a kid, I was watching Sabrina the Teenage Witch, and there's this bully that picks on her, and so she uses her witchcraft, I guess, to what she does is she stops time, and then she walks behind her, and then she resumes time, so that way the bully can't hit her. So she doesn't actually fight back or anything,
right?
But it was just like that's a cool way to stand up to a bully, is like make them look stupid because they try to hit you and they can't, because you basically, to the bully, it looked like she was teleporting, even though to us as the audience, she was just like freezing time and walking behind him. And I don't know why that stuck in my brain for whatever reason all these years. But when you described that just now of like teleporting and punching, I was like, oh, that sounds cool. I want to see that.
Yeah, it's really great to watch that actor. I wish I could think of his name, but he's so good in that role. Like it's almost worth watching.
Aiden Gallagher.
Oh yeah. Like it's almost worth watching it just for him alone, because like he's so entertaining, and just when they start to get emotional about stuff too, he's just standing there like, I don't care about this, like, or he'll be like, now that you're all done talking about your feelings, are we going to take care of the plan? Like, that's kind of like his, but again, it's like it's coming out of this younger kid, but he sounds like a boomer, or like
Yeah.
somebody that's in their 60s. So they do show more of like the post-apocalyptic end of the world, like what that looks like on the show as well. So you get more of a sense of like what that world was like and like what he lived through. And his mannequin girlfriend Dolores is there. Was the only person he talked to. It's kind of like that what's that Tom Hanks movie
Like
where he talks to
Castaway?
them all? Yeah, kind of like that.
Okay.
So
Except at the end of the world instead of on an island.
So yeah, and the latest season that we just started, they start to address the kids that weren't adopted by
Okay.
the professor.
Yeah, I wondered
So-
about that.
So they didn't really do anything with them early on, but now they're starting to get into it. Also, you don't know that he's a space alien until season 2. They don't tell
Oh.
you that at all. And you also have no explanation for why the pregnancies happen at the beginning. They just show the pregnancies happen and they're like, this inexplicably happened, but they don't do like the
kinda
alien
like the
wrestling
comic.
match.
Oh, well,
Yeah.
because that gave it so much context.
Right. So I'm kind of like, it's funny because when the show first came out, I was talking to my local comic shop owner about it. And he was like, do you want to know why everyone got pregnant? And I was like, I mean, kind of. I feel like that's a big plot hole in the show. And he's like, there was an alien wrestling match that sent energy through the universe that caused pregnancy in 43 women on Earth. And I was like, what?
Nuh-uh.
I was like, that can't be what's in the story. That's exactly what's in the story.
Wow.
So yeah, so I think maybe it was a good call for them just to be like, and we're not going to explain this. It just happened. Superheroes just appeared on Earth. I think that's almost better than the pink alien wrestled a tentacle monster. I don't know what you think, but
Yeah, it's kind of like, okay, thanks for that explanation, but maybe I was better off not knowing.
right. Yeah, so it's definitely really weird. It's definitely got a lot of the strangeness of the comic book, but it's more grounded and definitely the characters feel more real. So I think they did the best job that they could with it, honestly.
Well, it's interesting because I think this is the first time that I've read something that I've been like, this comic's not for me. It
Right.
was interesting to read it, but I don't think I need to read any more per se.
Right.
But it'd be interesting to see the Netflix show and just kind of compare, and then also just sort of revisit some of the concepts that were interesting or cool that I enjoyed that maybe didn't get a whole
Yeah.
lot of information on. It'd be interesting to check out for sure.
Well, and time travel is that's discussed a lot more. Paradoxes are discussed a lot more. The implications of going to the future, coming back, are we creating a new timeline? A lot of those kind of things that we really like, they deal with a lot of that kind of stuff. So if you're into that kind of sci-fi stuff, I think it's a decent fix for that as well.
So going back to Hargreaves and him being the monocle, we didn't mention this in the episode, but there's this point where number 5 puts on the monocle and he's able to see into some kind of weird like experimentation, and that's how Pogo came to be super intelligent.
Right.
So it's another, like, they give you a glimpse of something and then that thread isn't picked up for the rest of this book, but it's definitely, I'm sure, something that they pick up later. But it was really, I mean, with Hargreaves being an alien, it makes sense that he'd have some kind of weird alien technology. But the monocle was kind of interesting because it's like, oh, his on the nose name, or I guess on the eye name of being the monocle, like, is actually important because his monocle seems to be a window into either the past or another dimension or something. But
Right.
that was interesting. Did they
Yeah.
show that on the show at all?
They keep the professor really mysterious. Like I said, you don't find out he's an alien until season 2.
Mhm.
And then they actually do show him like back in time experimenting on Pogo. And it seems almost like it's the old trope of like, this was the first monkey to go into outer space. and then maybe that's why the professor found him or something, and then he enhanced his intelligence from there, and he came back, and I don't know, like I can't remember exactly how it plays out, but there was some real woman that looks exactly like the robot wife, but then by the time the Umbrella Academy kids are in the picture, she's dead, but he has like a robot replacement for her. So the robot mother is like more loving towards the children, and so they get like the actual, like the loving parenting from her basically on the show. So that's kind of interesting
Okay.
because they, in the comic, it seemed like they didn't really care about her. They were like, whatever, you're not even real. And you know,
Yeah.
number two like pulls the cloak off of her to reveal that she's like a cyborg or something. And in
Yeah, I kinda
the
got the
show
sense-
they
I kind of
really-
got the sense from the comic that she was really just like a figure. Like, yeah, she was their mother, but she really wasn't a mother. She was more just a
yeah
cyborg that they labeled as mother.
yeah, she fills that role more literally in the show. So like they actually care about her and stuff, and even though she's, you know, not quote unquote real. Oh, I would say another big difference is, so the comic book, you know, when it starts with that scene of them all fighting at the funeral,
Mhm.
number 5's quantum singularity that he comes out of opens in the middle of them having this huge fight at the funeral. And then he just falls out there, and then everybody stops fighting, and they're
Yeah.
like, what the heck? That's pretty much how they do it in the show. But then they don't go from there to like a big action set piece, because the thing with like the, what is it, the terminal or whatever, like he's not in the story at all.
Dr. Terminal.
So yeah, Dr. Terminal. Yeah, they don't do the flying popcorn whatever.
Oh man, I
Like
was hoping to see those.
I know. It would have been cool. They have some cool action stuff for sure, and they definitely show some crazy over the top things, but it seems like they tend to not go for the crazier things like the alien wrestling match or the flying popcorn tins. So
It's a little more serious. Not
yeah,
like super
it's a
serious,
little
but-
more serious. Like their dialogue is definitely funny. Like they quip back and forth with each other a lot, and yeah, it's fun to see the interactions. So, well,
All right.
have you got any other burning thoughts or hot takes about Umbrella Academy?
No, I think that's pretty well it. I do want to check out the Netflix series. I might maybe just skip through it unless it ends up being like really good. So I'm
Right.
glad I read this to at least know what it's about. And
Mhm.
you know, definitely getting into some of the characters a little bit more and understanding where they're coming from really helped to not just frame the story, but increase my enjoyment of it. I
Right.
think if I were just to read this on my own and not have a podcast or even talk to you about it, I'd probably just like, well, this is weird. I don't get it. And
And just
you know,
put it down and be like, all
move
right, well,
on. And I
right.
think that's like it's twofold. One, because it is super weird, but two, because they don't really they don't explain things to you very well, and so it's hard to make sense of it. And I think
Mhm.
you know, something like Doom Patrol, if you had watched the I don't think it was on Netflix, maybe
It was on like
HBO Max.
HBO. Yeah.
If you watched that first and then read the comic after, maybe that would have been more enjoyable because the show could have filled in, you know, that those kinds
Yeah.
of things, like
Mhm.
where we're having the knowledge going in, it's a lot more enjoyable because you're able to track it better. Whereas me going in, I'm just like, I'm completely confused. But then when I put notes together, I was like, okay, this is making a little more sense. And I had like a little cheat sheet of all of the, you know, the kids' numbers and what their names were. So that way, when they mentioned
Right.
somebody, I could say, oh, that's the one that can speak with the dead, or that's the one that has,
Right.
well, not the holding your breath indefinitely, because that was not really, you know, useful, but like the one with physical activity. Okay, you know, he's an
Sure.
astronaut and he's going to fight, and that makes sense. So I can start to understand this a little bit more. That helped me enjoy it more than if I, you know, like I said before, if I just kind of picked it up maybe in a comic shop, thumb through it, I'd be
Right.
like, this is a little out there. I think I'll go on to something else.
Right. Well, hey, that's why we're doing this, man. Discovering new stuff. So
Well,
Yeah.
hopefully it helps somebody else too. You know, if you've never got into this and you're interested, well, hopefully we've given you enough that you can make a decision if you want to try to read it or watch the show or avoid it altogether.
that's right. Well, hey, everybody, thanks so much for listening to the after show again, and we'll get you later.
Using my catchphrase. How dare you? Yeah, thanks for playing. We'll get you later.